World War II continues to uncover forgotten pieces of the conflict. In 2004, a Bell P-39 Airacobra, an American fighter used by the Soviets under the Lend-Lease program, was found in a frozen lake in the Russian Arctic. It was almost intact and contained the remains of the pilot. In 1989, at nearly 5,000 meters deep in the Atlantic, the battleship Bismarck, the Nazi flagship sunk after clashing with the Royal Navy, was located. In 2021, a Nazi cache hidden in a wall was discovered in Austria, containing carefully sealed weapons, documents, medals, and propaganda. In 2015, in Heikendorf, Germany, police found a functional Panther Tank in the basement of a private home. In 2022, crates of gold ingots marked with Reich symbols, hidden by officers fleeing the Eastern Front, were recovered in Poland. In 2009, archaeologists discovered a secret chamber in Wewelsburg Castle, the spiritual headquarters of the SS, containing esoteric symbols and ritual documentation. Actual fragments of the Nazi past recovered decades after their defeat. Memories on the wall. The Nazi stash hidden in a wall discovered in 2021. Sometimes the vestiges of the Third Reich lie not beneath the sea or buried beneath layers of earth, but hidden in plain sight, trapped between bricks. In April 2021, in the town of Hagen, Germany, a construction crew renovating the attic of a former school discovered something unusual, a secret compartment within a wall. Inside, carefully wrapped and preserved, lay objects that seemed frozen in time. The contents soon shocked both the workers and the local authorities. It was an intact Nazi cache. Among the items found were flags with swastikas, armbands, photographs of Adolf Hitler, Hitler Youth documents, and copies of the regime's propaganda literature. Some objects were so well preserved that the colors remained intense, as if time had not passed. The most disconcerting aspect was the organization of the hiding place. Everything was arranged with extreme care, indicating a deliberate attempt to conceal it, probably in the final days of the war when the defeat of the Reich was inevitable. The school where the stash was found had a history linked to the National Socialist regime. During the war, it had been used as a youth center and meeting point for the Hitler Youth. Local authorities believe that a member of the school staff, or even a party official, may have hidden the objects in the hope of preserving what was already considered compromising material. The find was handed over to the Hagen Municipal Museum for analysis and subsequent preservation. German historians noted that while the contents were not unique in themselves, the context was, finding such a comprehensive cache, hidden for more than 75 years inside a public building, offers a direct window into everyday fanaticism and the Nazi indoctrination structure of German youth. This discovery sparked a still sensitive debate in Germany: what to do with Nazi propaganda objects. While private ownership of such items is strictly regulated, museums have a responsibility to preserve them for educational purposes. The Hagen cache became part of a traveling exhibition focusing on Nazi pedagogy, as an example of the regime's reach into everyday life and how it sought to educate new generations under its ideology. Beyond its historical value, this find reminds us that traces of the past can remain hidden for generations, sometimes just a few centimeters beneath the surface, and that sometimes a simple hammer blow on a wall can reveal a sinister echo of history. The last giant, the Panther Tank that was found in perfect condition. On July 2, 2015, in the quiet town of Heikendorf, northern Germany, police carried out a raid that quickly made headlines around the world. What seemed like a routine operation to recover stolen art objects ended up revealing something much more unexpected. Hidden in the basement of a private villa was an authentic Panther Tank, fully restored and in working condition. It was not a model, nor a decommissioned museum piece, but one of the most feared combat vehicles of World War II, carefully preserved by a private collector. The Panther, officially known as Panzerkampfwagen 5, was one of the jewels of German military engineering. Designed as a response to the Soviet T-34, it combined firepower, armor, and mobility in an outstanding way. Although it entered combat relatively late in 1943, its impact was immediate. With a 75mm cannon and surprising speed for its size, it was considered by many experts to be one of the best tanks of the conflict. The example found in Heikendorf was in impeccable condition. Its owner, a 78-year-old man whose identity was not publicly revealed at the time, had acquired it decades earlier through international connections and had stored it in a vast basement converted into a private workshop. In addition to the tank, police found an anti-aircraft turret, several Nazi-era rifles, a bronze statue of Adolf Hitler, and other military artifacts, raising concerns about the purpose and ideology behind the collection. German authorities faced a legal dilemma. Possessing war weapons is prohibited by law in Germany, but some historical artifacts can be kept if they are deactivated or for museum purposes. However, the tank was operational, making it illegal under any circumstances. The legal process was complex, as the owner argued that the vehicle posed no threat and was part of a collection for historical purposes. Finally, after months of deliberations, the tank was allowed to be handed over to a private military museum, and the owner received a substantial fine. The case sparked a profound debate about the preservation of war artifacts, the fine line between historical collecting and Nazi glorification, and the oversight of private arsenals. What was disturbing about the discovery was not just the vehicle itself, but the fact that such a significant piece of the Third Reich's arsenal had been quietly hidden underground in an ordinary residential neighborhood, a tangible reminder that sometimes the ghosts of war lie not on the battlefield, but within the walls of our own cities. Treasure in the Quarry, rumors about the sunken Nazi truck at Kreidesee. In northern Germany, near the city of Cuxhaven, lies Lake Kreidesee, a former chalk quarry that, after being flooded, was transformed into a deep, icy clear water. Popular with divers for its visibility and dramatic backdrop, the lake holds a mystery that has fascinated explorers, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists for decades. Persistent rumors of a sunken Nazi truck, supposedly loaded with military equipment or something even more valuable. According to local stories, in the final days of the Third Reich, a military convoy attempted to hide part of its cargo by throwing it into this deep pit before the arrival of Allied troops. The theory is supported by historical facts, as many German units, finding themselves surrounded and unable to evacuate, destroyed or hid documents, weapons, and supplies to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Deep, isolated, and difficult to access at that time, Lake Kreidesee would have been an ideal hiding place. For years, the rumors persisted without concrete evidence. However, in the 1990s, local divers claimed to have spotted a metallic silhouette beneath a layer of silt at a depth of about 50 meters. It was said that it could be a military vehicle, possibly an Opel Blitz truck commonly used by the Wehrmacht. The story became even more intriguing when, on a subsequent dive, deformed metallic remains were documented, and according to some accounts, the partial structure of a broken safe. Despite the interest it generated, local authorities have never authorized an official exploration of the lake bottom for recovery purposes. Today, the Kreidesee is a nature conservation area and a renowned recreational center, which has limited underwater archaeological research. Nevertheless, private dives they have continued, fueling the myth with each new, uncertain sighting. Some skeptics maintain that it is simply an industrial remnant from the site's time as a quarry, but others remain convinced there is more to it, that the truck was part of a desperate operation to hide secrets of the Nazi regime, perhaps even relics, gold, stolen art, or classified documents. To this day, there is no conclusive proof of what lies in the depths of the Kreidesee, only rusted fragments, vague accounts, and an aura of mystery that grows with each year. Ice and fire, the incredible discovery of a Bell P-39 Airacobra in the Arctic. During World War II, the Bell P-39 Airacobra was one of the most unique fighter aircraft of the conflict. Designed by the American company Bell Aircraft, it was notable for its unusual configuration. The Allison 5-1710 engine was mounted behind the pilot, allowing for a powerful 37mm cannon to be mounted in the nose. Although its high-altitude performance was limited by the lack of a supercharger, the Airacobra was widely used in low-altitude missions and found notable use among the Soviet forces, who received thousands of them through the Lend-Lease program. Decades after the end of the war, this aircraft would once again make the news. In 2004, a team of Russian explorers discovered a submerged P-39 in the icy waters of Lake Martyava in the Arctic region of Murmansk. The aircraft had lain untouched beneath the ice since it crashed during a training mission in 1944. Thanks to the extreme environmental conditions, the aircraft was exceptionally well preserved. Even the original markings on the fuselage were still legible. The discovery sparked immediate interest in both the military and historical circles. Not only was it a perfectly preserved time capsule, but it also offered key information about the Soviet use of American aircraft during the war. Subsequent investigations revealed that the pilot, Lieutenant Ivan Baranovsky, had disappeared during a training flight, and his remains were still in the cockpit when the plane was discovered. Their identification finally allowed for the military honors it had never received. The Airacobra was carefully extracted from the bottom of the lake and restored in extreme detail. Today, this specific model is displayed at the Central Museum of the Russian Air Force in Monino as a symbol of cooperation between Allied powers that, despite profound ideological differences, fought together against Nazism. The case of the P-39 also helped recover some of the forgotten history of Soviet pilots who flew Western aircraft during the war. Beyond its technical and material value, this find represents a bridge between two worlds. An American plane, piloted by a young Soviet man, lost in the frozen northern lands and found almost intact. 60 years later, it became a silent testimony to the magnitude of the conflict and the individual stories that were frozen in time. The fall of the Leviathan, the discovery of the remains of the sinking battleship Bismarck. It was one of the symbols of the Third Reich's naval power. The battleship Bismarck, the pride of the German Kriegsmarine, was designed to dominate the seas of northern Europe. Measuring over 250 meters in length, with impenetrable armor and 380mm guns, the Bismarck was a floating fortress. Its launch in 1939 was a propaganda event for the Nazi regime, and its first mission in 1941, Operation Rheinübung, marked the beginning of a brief but legendary campaign. On May 24, 1941, the Bismarck sank HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, in just a few minutes. The destruction of the Hood unleashed an unprecedented manhunt. The entire British fleet was mobilized to find and destroy the German battleship. Finally, on May 27th, after a fierce naval battle and multiple air attacks, the Bismarck was sunk in the North Atlantic. More than 2,000 men died. Their exact location remained a mystery for nearly half a century. In June 1989, oceanographer Robert Ballard, already famous for his discovery of the wreck of the iconic ocean liner Titanic, located the remains of the Bismarck at a depth of approximately 4,800 meters, 650 kilometers off the French coast. The discovery was both a technical and historical milestone. Images showed the hull almost intact, with the Imperial Eagle still visible on the bow. The magnitude of the wreck and its excellent state of preservation surprised even experts. Detailed analysis of the wreck helped resolve long-standing debates. Evidence indicated that, although severely damaged by British attacks, the Bismarck was deliberately scuttled by its own crew to avoid capture. The site where the Bismarck lies was declared a war grave and has become a place of reverence for the descendants of German sailors and naval historians. No mining or commercial exploration has been permitted. The battleship remains there, motionless in the darkness of the ocean floor, a monument to technological arrogance, human sacrifice, and the drama of naval warfare. The Last Samurai, the discovery of the Musashi, the sunken Leviathan. The Musashi was one of the most colossal warships ever built. Twin sister to the Yamato, this Japanese battleship represented the pinnacle of imperial naval power. With over 72,000 tons of fully loaded displacement, nearly impenetrable armor, and 460mm main guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship, the Musashi was conceived to dominate the Pacific. However, history had in store for it a fate as brief as it was tragic. Despite its power, the Musashi barely saw combat for much of the war. It was in the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 that it saw action and met its end. During the engagement, the American fleet launched wave after wave of aircraft against the Japanese squadron. The Musashi was a priority target, receiving at least 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs over the course of several hours. Severely damaged, the gigantic ship finally sank, taking over 1,000 men with it. For decades, the exact location of the shipwreck remained forgotten, lost in the vast depths of the Sibuyan Sea in the Philippines. It wasn't until March 2015 that Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen led an expedition that successfully located the battleship's remains. Using an unmanned underwater vehicle aboard his exploration yacht, MY Octopus, the team descended to a depth of over 1,000 meters. There, amid the shadows of the seafloor, the imposing silhouette of the Musashi appeared. Images transmitted in real time showed recognizable structures: the main turret, fragments of the bridge, and the massive gun turrets. The identification was made possible by unique technical details of the ship, such as the specific design of its guns and the arrangement of its anchors. Despite the damage sustained during the sinking, much of the hull remained intact, offering an unprecedented glimpse into Japanese naval engineering at the time. The discovery of the Musashi was more than a technological feat. It was an act of remembrance. Japan officially recognized the discovery as an event of historical significance, and many descendants of the fallen sailors expressed their gratitude. The site became a silent symbol of honor, tragedy, and reconciliation. The Emperor's Tomb, the discovery of the Fura Bunker. Beneath the streets of modern Berlin lies one of the darkest and most symbolic places of the 20th century, the Fura Bunker, Adolf Hitler's last refuge. In this underground bunker, hidden under tons of concrete and earth, the dictator spent his final days as the Third Reich collapsed around them. It was there that on April 30th, 1945, he fell alongside Eva Braun, sealing the end of the Nazi regime. After the German surrender, the Soviets took control of the site and kept its existence a secret. For decades, the bunker was a place shrouded in rumor, misinformation, and silence. The communist regime of East Germany prevented any commemoration or archaeological exploration of the site. Access points were sealed, entrances destroyed, and eventually apartment blocks were built over the area to erase all traces. The precise location of the Fura Bunker became an enigma, fueling conspiracy theories from fake escape tunnels to Hitler's supposed escape. It wasn't until after German reunification in the 1990s that archaeological and historical efforts began to pinpoint the bunker's location. In 2006, after decades of speculation, a discreet information plaque was installed at the site, a nondescript grey parking lot on Inden Ministergärten Street near the Brandenburg Gate. There, beneath the asphalt, the remains of the bunker still remain: concrete walls, sealed corridors, and rooms where Hitler spent his final hours. Although partially destroyed by the Soviets in the 1940s and 1950s, part of the Fura Bunker remains inaccessible and protected. Public access is not permitted, and the German government has taken strict measures to prevent it from becoming a place of worship for extremists. Even so, the site has sparked profound tourist and academic interest. Historians have digitally reconstructed the complex's original layout, which included personal quarters, meeting rooms, ventilation systems, and even an artificial garden above ground. The discovery and documentation of the Fura Bunker not only served to close a chapter in history, but also to confront it. The fact that the place where the Nazi regime ended is not a mausoleum or a museum, but a simple parking lot, is a deliberate decision by the German state. There is no glory in the fall of a tyranny. Today, the Fura Bunker is invisible to the naked eye. There are no monumental ruins or remains on display, only a sober plaque commemorating the essentials. It is a space of remembrance without spectacle, where silence weighs more than words. Confusing times, Ireland's declarations of neutrality and EIRE signals. During World War II, as Europe burned and the great powers clashed on all fronts, Ireland took an unusual and firm stance: neutrality. Since its independence from the United Kingdom, the young state, the Irish, were seeking to assert their sovereignty, and the outbreak of conflict in 1939 offered a unique, if risky, opportunity to remain on the sidelines. This neutrality, however, had a peculiar and visual expression: gigantic stone signs engraved on the country's cliffs and coasts that simply read Éire. Éire is the Gaelic word for Ireland, and these markers were designed to be seen from the air. Their purpose was clear: to warn warplanes, both Allied and Axis, that they were flying over neutral territory. These markings were a simple but ingenious defensive measure in an era when air navigation relied more on visual observation than advanced instruments. More than 80 markers were built along the Irish coast, each with white letters between 10 and 12 meters long, made of stones and lime. The paradox is that these markings, while protecting Ireland's neutrality, also served as reference points for Allied pilots. Some historians have argued that the Irish government, although officially supposedly neutral, quietly cooperated with the Allied forces, allowing reconnaissance flights, sharing key weather information, and tolerating the presence of British spies on its territory. The EIRE markings were part of this ambiguous diplomatic dance and are considered a gesture to both sides, affirming neutrality while avoiding direct confrontation. The mystery and beauty of these signs remained relatively forgotten until the 21st century, when some began to be rediscovered thanks to satellite imagery, aerial photography, and curious hikers. Many had been covered by vegetation or eroded by time, but others were still surprisingly well preserved. One of the best known is the one located at Bray Head, County Wicklow, visible from the sky and from hiking trails along the cliffs. Today, the EIRE signs are silent monuments to a complex political strategy. They represent a nation that refused to be swept away by the winds of war, but at the same time was not completely indifferent to the suffering around it. Ireland welcomed refugees, aided downed pilots, and maintained a precarious balance between its independent identity and geopolitical pressures. In a conflict dominated by brutality and destruction, the white letters on Irish green are a symbol of another way of resisting, without shooting, without invading, only by asserting one's existence from on high. Whale Graveyard, the rescue of sunken U-boats in the Atlantic. During World War II, the oceans became silent and deadly battlefields. The Atlantic in particular witnessed a brutal war of attrition, where German submarines, known as U-boats, they lurked in the depths with the mission of cutting supply lines between North America and Europe. It was the so-called Battle of the Atlantic, a naval conflict that lasted almost the entire war and claimed the lives of tens of thousands of sailors. U-boats were feared for their ability to attack without warning. They slipped beneath the surface, ambushed Allied convoys, and disappeared into the depths before a response could be mounted. However, towards the middle of the war, advances in anti-submarine technology such as radar, sonar, and depth charges began to even the playing field. Hundreds of U-boats were eventually sunk at various points in the Atlantic, from the coasts of Ireland to the Caribbean, transforming the seabed into veritable graveyards of steel. For decades, many of these submarines remained missing, their exact coordinates forgotten or classified. But in recent years, oceanographic explorations, historical research, and technological advances have made it possible to locate several of these sunken hulls. One of the most remarkable finds was that of U-576, discovered in 2014 off the coast of North Carolina at a depth of 210 meters. The submarine had been sunk in July 1942 during a fierce engagement with an Allied convoy. Remarkably, its hull remained almost intact, a silent testament to the ferocity of the battle. Another impressive find was that of U-166, discovered near the Mississippi Delta. It had been sunk by an American patrol boat in 1942 and was found alongside the wreckage of one of the merchant ships it had attacked, as if both enemies had been frozen in their final battle. These discoveries not only offer accurate historical data on naval battles, but are also treated with deep respect. Most sunken U-boats are considered war graves, as many of their crew members never escaped. In many cases, authorities choose not to disturb the wreckage, limiting access to scientific expeditions and prohibiting any recovery attempts. Sunken U-boats in the Atlantic are submerged time capsules. Their compartments still hold personal belongings, weapons, navigational instruments, and even food preserved by the pressure and temperature of the seabed. Each of these rusting hulls is an untold story, a life frozen at the exact moment of its destruction. Today, thanks to detailed underwater maps and remote-controlled vehicles, the Atlantic is beginning to reveal these secrets, and as it does, it reminds us that beneath the apparent calm of the ocean lies an invisible, silent, and deeply human war. Heroines of Heaven, the spy dove found in a British chimney. In 2012, a resident of the quiet village of Bletchingley, Surrey, England, made a discovery as unusual as it was intriguing. While renovating the fireplace of his 19th-century cottage, he discovered the bones of a pigeon with a small red cylinder tied to its leg. Inside, still intact after nearly 7 decades, was a coded message. Unbeknownst to him, the man had unearthed one of the most curious and still unsolved secrets of World War II. During the conflict, when communications were vulnerable to enemy interference, the United Kingdom again turned to an old but reliable method: carrier pigeons. More than 250,000 birds were used by British forces, many of them trained by the National Pigeon Service. These pigeons were sent across the English Channel from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, carrying vital messages about enemy movements, troop locations, or coordinates for airstrikes. The pigeon found in Surrey was likely en route to Bletchley Park, the British Centre for Intelligence and Code Breaking, where cryptographers such as Alan Turing worked. However, it never completed its mission. Apparently exhausted or disoriented, it descended a chimney and became trapped, its message undelivered, until it was discovered almost 70 years later. The message, although partially damaged, was written in a series of cryptic codes and abbreviations. The BBC and cryptography experts analysed it and confirmed that it had been sent by an agent codenamed SJTW Stott from occupied Normandy, likely shortly after D-Day in 1944. But what's most fascinating is that the code has yet to be broken. Even experts at GCHQ, the British intelligence agency that inherited Bletchley Park, were unable to break it, indicating that the message used one-time encryption, a method nearly impossible to decipher without the original key. The discovery captured the world's attention. It was like opening a time capsule of wartime espionage, a vestige of a silent battle fought in the shadows. Carrier pigeons were not only brave, as many died in service, but also vital. Several crucial messages were delivered thanks to them, and some even received medals of merit. Today, the pigeon's remains and its mysterious message are housed in the Bletchley Park Communications Museum. They remain a symbol of human ingenuity in wartime and of the unexpected role these birds played in history. As long as the message remains undeciphered, it will continue to fuel the imagination of historians and enthusiasts. What urgency did it contain? What vital information was trapped in a chimney for almost 70 years? A simple bird, a failed mission, and a code that still holds its secret. This is how sometimes great mysteries come from the most humble of sources, a forgotten nest in an old country house. Case closed, how the USS Indianapolis tragedy was uncovered. In the history of World War II, few stories so intensely combine heroism, secrecy, and horror as that of the USS Indianapolis. This American heavy cruiser, launched in 1931, served in multiple Pacific campaigns, but it was its final mission that forever immortalized it. On July 16, 1945, the Indianapolis set sail from San Francisco on a highly classified mission to transport key components for the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, which would be dropped on Hiroshima just weeks later. The ship arrived safely at Tinian Island, delivered its cargo, and departed for the Philippines. But on July 30th, while crossing the Philippine Sea, it was torpedoed by the Japanese submarine P-58. The impact was devastating. The cruise ship sank in just 12 minutes without even sending a distress signal. Of the 1,196 men on board, nearly 300 died instantly. The rest, approximately 900 sailors, were left adrift in the middle of the ocean, without sufficient lifeboats, exposed to the scorching sun, thirst, malnutrition, and sharks. For 4 days and 5 nights, the survivors struggled to stay alive, while the High Command ignored their disappearance. It was one of the worst maritime disasters in American history. When they were finally rescued on August 2nd, only 316 men remained alive. Many had been eaten by sharks, others had succumbed to madness, dehydration, or injuries. The magnitude of the tragedy generated a national outcry. How could such an important ship have disappeared without anyone noticing? The Indianapolis's captain, Charles McVeigh, was made a scapegoat. Despite being considered a hero by many, he was court-martialed in a deeply unfair trial. Decades later, a campaign led by survivors led to McVeigh's posthumous exoneration by the United States Congress in 2000. For a long time, the remains of the Indianapolis remained lost on the ocean floor. But in August 2017, an expedition funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen managed to locate the wreck at a depth of more than 5,000 meters in the Philippine Sea. Underwater drone footage showed the hull, gun turrets, and other structures still recognizable. It was a moment of closure for many families and an act of symbolic justice. The story of the USS Indianapolis is not just one of military tragedy. It is also the story of a nuclear secret, of men abandoned by bureaucracy, of the devastating power of war, and of the struggle to redeem honor. Today, its memory endures as one of the most poignant episodes of the conflict, a living warning of the price of silence. The Angel Without Wings, the Douglas Dauntless SBD-5 rescued from Lake Michigan. Not all remnants of World War II lie on distant battlefields or in the depths of the ocean. Some remained hidden for decades beneath the still waters of lakes, seemingly untouched by the conflict. Such is the case of the Douglas SBD-5 Dauntless, recovered from Lake Michigan, a submerged time capsule that brought part of the glorious past of American naval aviation back to the surface. During the war, the U.S. Navy used Lake Michigan as a training ground for naval pilots, far from enemy threats. In particular, the training aircraft carriers USS Wolverine and USS Sable, two converted vessels that operated exclusively on the lake, served as platforms for takeoff and landing practice. It was a vital operation, but not without accidents. More than 300 aircraft sank in the lake's depths due to mechanical failure or human error. One such aircraft was the Douglas SBD-5 Dauntless, a dive bomber famous for its role in the Battle of Midway, where it helped sink several Japanese aircraft carriers. In the 1990s, the US government authorized an ambitious salvage project to recover some of these submerged aircraft, given their historical significance and their excellent state of preservation thanks to the lake's cold freshwaters. In 2009, one of the most remarkable discoveries was precisely that of an SBD-5 sunk in 1944. The aircraft was located at a depth of 60 meters, almost intact. The fuselage, controls, and even the cockpit instruments were surprisingly well preserved. After a complex operation, it was carefully raised to the surface and transported for complete restoration. The process took several years and was carried out by historical aviation specialists. Finally, the restored aircraft was delivered to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, where it can now be admired as part of an exhibit dedicated to the history of aircraft carriers and naval training. Unlike many warplanes that were destroyed or scrapped, this Dauntless offers an almost original glimpse into what it was like to pilot a dive bomber in the midst of war. The rescue of the Dauntless was not only a logistical triumph, but also a symbolic one. It is a way of recovering the untold story of those pilots who trained far from the front and whose silent work was essential to victory. Many of them never saw combat, but their training allowed others to triumph when it was most needed. Today, the SBD-5 salvaged from Lake Michigan reminds us that not all battlefields are marked on maps. Some lie beneath calm waters, waiting for someone to restore them to their rightful place in the collective memory. For a handful of bills, where is the counterfeit money of Operation Bernhard? During World War II, the Third Reich not only waged war with guns, tanks, and bombs, it also attempted to destabilize the enemy through less conventional means. One of the most audacious and secretive plans was Operation Bernhard, a massive currency counterfeiting operation designed to flood the United Kingdom with counterfeit banknotes, destroy its economy, and undermine confidence in the pound sterling. The project was as ambitious as it was sinister, and its traces would come to light decades later, beneath the mud of an Austrian lake. The operation began in 1942 on the direct orders of Heinrich Himmler. Its objective was to manufacture perfect replicas of British banknotes, especially the 5, 10, 20, and 50-pound notes. To achieve this, the Nazis recruited experts in printing, typography, and engraving, but also prisoners from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. These men, many of them Jewish, printers and bankers before the war, were promised a better chance of survival if they collaborated. They worked in precarious conditions, isolated, knowing that the slightest mistake could cost them their lives. The result was astonishing. The counterfeit banknotes were of such high quality that even banking experts could not distinguish them from the originals. According to estimates, the operation produced more than 130 million counterfeit pounds sterling, a sum equivalent to billions today, making it the largest currency counterfeiting operation in history. Some of this money was used by Nazi intelligence to fund covert operations, purchase information, and sustain spy networks. But the master plan, to airdrop millions of pounds onto the United Kingdom to generate inflation and chaos, never came to fruition. In 1945, with the Third Reich in retreat, the documents, printing plates, and counterfeit banknotes were transported to the Austrian Alps. Faced with the imminent Allied advance, the Nazis dumped some of this material at the bottom of Lake Toplitz, a deep, dark body of water surrounded by thick forest. Decades later, explorers, treasure hunters, and historians began investigating the lake's bottom. Beginning in the 1950s, several expeditions found vast quantities of counterfeit banknotes, many still legible. wrapped in metal containers or trapped between submerged branches. Printing plates, documents, and counterfeiting equipment were also found. Although the popular myth spoke of sunken Nazi gold, what emerged was an even more twisted story, a secret war made of ink, paper, and deception. Today, some of these counterfeit banknotes are preserved in museums such as the Bank of England Museum and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They serve as testimony to an operation whose scope was as subtle as it was dangerous. Operation Bernhard failed to collapse the British economy, but it did reveal the extent to which the Nazi regime was willing to manipulate every available resource to achieve its goal. Fragments of that massive deception may still remain in the cold waters of Lake Toplitz, fragments of a war that was also fought in the shadows, with paper money as a silent weapon. See the Raptors, the giant bronze eagle statue of Admiral Graf Spee. In December 1939, in the midst of the initial phase of World War II, the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee was sunk off the coast of the Rio de la Plata off Uruguay. What seemed like just another episode in the naval conflict would end up producing one of the most controversial and symbolic discoveries of the Nazi past. The recovery, more than half a century later, of an enormous bronze eagle with a swastika in its talons which adorned the ship's stern. The Graf Spee had been a real threat to Allied convoys in the South Atlantic. After sinking several British merchant ships, it was located and cornered by 3 enemy cruisers off the coast of neutral Uruguay. After suffering considerable damage in the Battle of the Rio de la Plata, Captain Hans Langsdorff chose to take refuge in the port of Montevideo. In a drastic decision and following diplomatic pressure, he ordered the sinking of his own ship to prevent it from falling into Allied hands. 3 days later, Langsdorff committed suicide in Buenos Aires. The Graf Spee remained partially submerged and forgotten for decades. But in the 2000s, an ambitious recovery project led by Uruguayan experts managed to salvage several pieces from the sunken battleship, including its distinctive imperial eagle. The bronze sculpture, with a wingspan of over 2 meters and a weight of 350 kilograms, was found in 2006 attached to a submerged section of the hull, covered in algae and slime, but clearly recognizable. The discovery caused an international stir. It wasn't just an archaeological artifact. The eagle with the Nazi swastika was an unequivocal symbol of the darkest regime of the 20th century. Uruguayan authorities faced a dilemma. Was it a museum piece or an object of ideological propaganda? There were proposals to auction it off, sparking outrage among human rights organizations and foreign governments. There was even discussion of destroying it to prevent it from becoming a fetish for neo-Nazi groups. Ultimately, the Uruguayan government decided to keep it under safekeeping, away from direct public display. The debate over its fate continues. Some advocate for its display in a historical and educational context as part of an exhibition on Nazism and World War II. Others, fearing its propaganda use, insist on keeping it out of public view. The story of the Graf Spee eagle is a reminder of how vestiges of the past can retain profound symbolic power. Beyond its physical weight, what was rescued from the waters of the Rio de la Plata was a part of the uncomfortable part of world history. A bronze figure that represents not only a sunken warship, but an entire defeated ideology and the ghosts it still leaves in its wake. Lost memory, the wreck of the USS Yorktown at Midway. The Battle of Midway, fought between June 4th and 7th, 1942, marked a decisive turning point in the Pacific War. It was there that the United States Navy managed to inflict a devastating blow on the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 of its aircraft carriers in just a few days. However, the victory also came at a high cost. Among the damaged American ships was the USS Yorktown, an aircraft carrier that had already survived the Battle of the Coral Sea and heroically returned to combat, barely repaired. Midway would be its last mission. The Yorktown was attacked by torpedoes launched by Japanese aircraft. Severely damaged, it began to list, and although the crew attempted to save it, it was finished off by an enemy submarine. On June 7th, it finally sank into the depths of the ocean, taking more than 140 men with it. For decades, its exact whereabouts remained unknown, swallowed by the dark waters of the Pacific. It wasn't until 1998 that an expedition led by oceanographer Robert Ballard The same man who had discovered the battleship Bismarck managed to locate the hull of the Yorktown at a depth of about 5,000 meters in a remote region of the ocean northwest of Midway. The discovery was hailed as a technological and archaeological feat. Using remote-controlled vehicles, the team captured images of the ship, its silhouette emerging from the seafloor like a sinister ghost from the past. Despite the impact of torpedoes and the weight of decades, much of the Yorktown remained surprisingly well preserved. The bridge structures, the launch catapults, and even the pilot's cockpit were still recognizable. It was like rediscovering a sleeping giant, a colossus that had fought some of the most important battles in modern naval history. The discovery of the Yorktown not only had historical value, it was an act of homage. For the descendants of the crew, the discovery meant healing a wound. During the virtual commemoration ceremony, researchers dropped an American flag over the submerged hull. No artifacts were recovered. The site was declared a war grave and has remained protected ever since. Today, the USS Yorktown rests silently on the ocean floor, an eternal witness to the battle that turned the tide of the war in the Pacific. Its rediscovery not only recalled Midway's strategic importance, but also the sacrifice of those who fought on its decks and never returned. There, beneath miles of water, the aircraft carrier still seems to maintain its position, vigilant as if waiting for the next mission that will never come. The Paintbrush Soldiers, the awesome ghost army of the US Army. During World War II, not all soldiers carried weapons. Some fought their battles with paintbrushes, loudspeakers, and inflatable balloons. These were the members of the United States Army's 23rd Special Troops Company, better known as the Ghost Army, a secret unit whose full existence wasn't officially acknowledged until decades later. Their mission was simple, yet brilliant: to deceive the enemy. This fictional army was created in 1944, comprised of approximately 1,100 men, many of them artists, designers, sound engineers, and actors. They used a combination of visual, sound, and theatrical effects to simulate the presence of entire US Army divisions. Using inflatable tanks, prop cannons, recorded engine noises, and fake radio transmissions, they managed to convince the German forces that they were facing a real threat. The Ghost Army operated primarily in France, Belgium, and Germany, and was instrumental in more than 20 deception operations, including a diversion that facilitated the crossing of the Rhine in 1945. They never fired a weapon, but their actions are estimated to have saved thousands of lives by confusing and redirecting enemy troops. For decades, their existence remained classified. It wasn't until the 1990s that declassified documents began to shed light on this invisible unit. From there, historians, veterans, and their families began to piece together a fascinating story filled with ingenuity, risk, and creativity in the midst of war. In 2013, the discovery of a set of sketches, altered uniforms, and detailed plans of military sets, all found in a former Army depot, confirmed the scale of the work accomplished by the Ghost Army. Among the documents was also a proposed decoration that was never awarded. This oversight began to be corrected by civil organizations and by the United States Congress itself. Finally, in 2022, more than 75 years after the end of the war, the 23rd Special Troops Company was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the country's highest civilian honors. It was a posthumous recognition of a group of soldier artists who fought without firing a shot, but with a creativity as sharp as any weapon. Today, some of their inflatable tanks are preserved in military museums. Documentaries, books, and exhibitions have breathed new life into this until recently hidden chapter. The Ghost Army proves that, even in the midst of the greatest war of the 20th century, imagination was a strategic tool as powerful as a bomber. And although its soldiers remained invisible for decades, their legacy now shines brightly, the echo of an army that fooled Hitler with art. Open wounds, the Maccabra mass graves of Katin. Deep in the forests of Katin, near the city of Smolensk, Russia, lies one of the darkest chapters of World War II. But when the mass graves were finally discovered, the remains of thousands of murdered Polish officers emerged with them, along with documents, medals, boots, and personal belongings that silently recounted a long-hidden tragedy. The Katin massacre dates back to 1940, when the Soviet Union occupied eastern Poland following the German-Soviet non-aggression pact. In that context, More than 22,000 Polish army officers, police officers, intellectuals, doctors, engineers and social leaders were arrested by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. They were, for the most part, members of the Polish elite. Stalin considered them a threat to Soviet rule over Poland. The solution was brutal: exterminate them. During the spring of 1940, the prisoners were executed with a shot to the back of the head and their bodies buried in mass graves in various locations across the Soviet West, Katin being the most emblematic. The crime remained hidden until 1943, when the German army, then at war with the USSR, discovered the graves while occupying the area. Berlin exploited the discovery for propaganda purposes, accusing Stalin of the crime. The Soviets, for their part, denied responsibility and blamed the Nazis, even after the war. The truth, although documented by witnesses and survivors, was suppressed for decades. The West, a temporary ally of the USSR, avoided publicly confronting Stalin. It wasn't until the fall of communism that the Soviet archives began to be opened. In 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev officially acknowledged Soviet responsibility for the Katin massacre. In 2010, key documents were declassified, confirming Stalin's direct order to carry out the executions. The archaeological rediscovery of the graves, coupled with modern forensic analysis, led to the identification of hundreds of victims. Their bodies were carefully exhumed, many still in their uniforms and personal belongings, stopped watches, rosaries, letters, military insignia. Each item was a voice returning from the past, demanding memory and justice. Today, the Katin Forest is a place of mourning and commemoration. In 2000, a joint Polish-Russian memorial complex was inaugurated there, although diplomatic tensions between the two countries remain simmering. Rather than healing, the wounds of Katin reopen every time historical silence confronts the truth. The Katin graves contain more than just bodies. They contain a warning that history, when manipulated or suppressed, ends up burying not only lives but also the possibility of justice, and that only with memory, even the most painful, can we aspire to anything resembling reconciliation. The weight of greed, the sunken silver treasure of the SS Gaasop. The Atlantic Ocean has been a vast graveyard of ships for centuries, but few shipwrecks have captured modern attention as much as that of the SS Gaasop, a British freighter sunk in 1941. What began as a routine transport mission during World War II ended in tragedy, but also in one of the largest salvages of precious metals in history. The Gaasop had set sail from Calcutta, British India, loaded with tea, iron ingots and strategic treasure, more than 200 tons of silver ingots destined for the British Treasury. Its goal was to reach the United Kingdom, navigating the dangerous waters infested with German U-boats. But as the ship approached the British Isles, conditions worsened. Separated from its protective convoy and with fuel running low, the captain decided to head for the port of Galway on the west coast of Ireland. But it never reached its destination. On February 17, 1941, the Gaasop was located by the German submarine U-101. A single torpedo was enough to split the ship in two. It sank rapidly at almost 5,000 meters deep, taking its cargo and the lives of most of its crew with it. Only one of the 85 men on board survived, after an odyssey of several days in a lifeboat. For decades, the shipwreck remained forgotten, identified only in naval records. It wasn't until 2011 that the American company Odyssey Marine Exploration located the remains of the Gaasop 480 kilometers southwest of Ireland using high-precision sonar technology. The discovery marked the beginning of an unprecedented operation, extracting the silver cargo from a depth never before reached in this type of mission. In 2012, after months of work using unmanned underwater vehicles, Odyssey announced the recovery of more than 1,200 silver ingots, the equivalent of about 48 tons. In total, it is estimated that more than 110 tons were recovered, making this undertaking the largest deep-water discovery of precious metals in history. The cargo was shared between the company and the British government, according to a salvage contract. The wreck of the SS Gaasop is not only a story of submerged wealth, but also a time capsule connecting colonial trade, submarine warfare, and the United Kingdom's war economy. The ingots, marked with inscriptions from the Royal Mint and banks in British India, are now displayed in museums and private collections as a testament to the price of war and the value that was literally deposited at the bottom of the sea. In the abyss, for more than 70 years, tons of silver lay, forgotten by the world. Until modern technology and the perseverance of a handful of explorers brought them back to light, along with the echoes of a war that, even in the depths, still lingers. The value of the word, the Jewish treasure of Vilna, the Jerusalem of the North. Before World War II, the city of Vilnius, today the capital of Lithuania, was known as the Jerusalem of the North. Home to one of the most thriving Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, it housed centuries-old synagogues, libraries, publishing houses, sacred manuscripts, and a vibrant intellectual life. All of this was destroyed by Nazism. However, decades later, the community's buried past would resurface from the depths of the earth in the form of a cultural treasure hidden in the shadow of the Holocaust. When Nazi troops occupied Vilna in 1941, they began a systematic process of extermination against the Jewish population and a meticulous looting of their possessions. But among the ruins of the ghetto, a small group of Jewish prisoners, known as the Paper Brigade, was forced to sort and pack the confiscated books, manuscripts, and religious objects. Many of these treasures were sent to the Institute for the Study of the Jewish Question in Frankfurt as cultural plunder for the Reich. But the brigade members, risking their lives, managed to hide a significant portion of this heritage. During the night, these men, who were primarily scholars, librarians, and poets, buried books and documents in metal boxes, concealed them between walls, in tunnels, and beneath the floors of abandoned buildings. They knew they could not save their people, but they were trying to save their souls. By the end of the war, most of them had been murdered or had emigrated. The caches remained forgotten until, beginning in the 1980s, clues began to emerge. But it wasn't until 2017 that an international team of archaeologists and historians, using ground-penetrating radar technology, managed to identify and excavate an ancient cache beneath a library in Vilnius. There, preserved against all odds, were more than 170 rare books, religious manuscripts, community documents, and texts written in Hebrew, Yiddish, and Lithuanian. Most of these objects had belonged to pre-war Jewish institutions, such as the famous Strashun Library. The find was valuable not only for its rarity, but also for its symbolism. They were the words, ideas, and prayers of a community that Nazism had sought to erase. The recovered objects were restored, and some were sent to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York, where they are preserved today alongside other documents saved from the Holocaust. Some remain in Lithuania, where they are displayed in museums and memorial centers. The Vilnius treasure is not made of gold or gems, but of pages, ink, and words. It is a legacy that survived fire, destruction, and time. It is a legacy rescued by those who knew that if the world ever wanted to remember, it would need more than names, it would need words. The Secret Underground, Churchill's impressive secret bunker network. As London burned under Nazi bombing during the Blitz, the British leadership knew that the government's survival depended not only on the courage of its people, but on its ability to continue operating in secret. Thus was born an underground network of bunkers, tunnels, and command posts that would allow Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his cabinet to resist even the most devastating attack. For decades, many of these sites remained classified. Their existence was a state secret, hidden under the guise of basements, ordinary buildings, and locked doors. The best known of these shelters is the Cabinet War Rooms, located beneath the streets of central London, a short distance from Whitehall. There, in a tangle of concrete and steel-reinforced corridors, Churchill directed much of the British war effort. The facility included meeting rooms, private rooms, communications centres, and even a personal bedroom for the Prime Minister. It was designed to withstand bombs and keep government operations running smoothly. But this was only one of several nodes in a larger network. Additional underground complexes have been documented in locations such as Corsham, Wiltshire, where the central government war headquarters was built, a massive bunker capable of housing several thousand civil servants in the event of an invasion or the total collapse of London. Hidden beneath a former quarry, the site boasted its own ventilation system, internal telephone networks, and even a hospital. The true extent of this network became known in greater detail in recent decades as documents were declassified and former workers began to speak out. In 2008, an urban archaeological expedition located a forgotten entrance to one such shelter in East London. There, beneath a layer of rubble and dust, they found intact furniture, wall maps of Europe tagged with thumbtacks, porcelain cups and bakelite telephones still hanging. The idea behind this infrastructure was simple but radical, proposing that even if the surface was scorched, the heart of government should continue to beat. And Churchill, obsessed with continuity of leadership, personally oversaw many of these facilities. He is said to have walked the corridors of the war rooms in his bathrobe, issuing orders and drafting speeches as bombs thundered over the city. Today, some of these sites have been opened to the public, such as the Churchill War Rooms Museum, which allows visitors to walk the corridors that once housed decisions that defined the fate of Europe. Others remain hidden, inaccessible or sealed under layers of concrete and state secrets. Churchill's bunker network was not only a logistical marvel, it was a symbol of Britain's determination to resist against all odds. Underground, amidst cables, maps and dim lights, the defense of a nation was being hatched. And even today, in the silence of those tunnels, the echo of the voice that promised never to surrender resonates.